There was an article that was purported to have been written by her in one of the magazine, one of the Star. Or
Television has never seen a betrayal quite like this. Happy Days gave America one of the most emotional farewells in TV history, only for ABC to destroy it overnight and leave the cast trapped in the wreckage. In 1984, the show was meant to close with Tom Bosley's heartfelt goodbye, a moment of pure closure after 11 seasons with the Cunningham family. But that blunder from ABC left fans heartbroken and the legacy fractured. And how did 5 forgotten episodes rise from the grave to kill a classic? Secret fight that almost destroyed Happy Days. Ron Howard was ready to walk away from Happy Days. By the late 1970s, the fresh-faced actor who had carried the sitcom since 1974 dropped an ultimatum that rattled ABC's executive offices. It had nothing to do with salary disputes or creative notes. It came down to 2 words the network wanted to slip into the show's title. By its 3rd season, Happy Days had turned into a cultural powerhouse. Families tuned in weekly, advertisers lined up, and cast members became household names. But it wasn't Richie Cunningham, the all-American teenager played by Howard, who was driving the frenzy. It was Arthur Fonzarelli, Henry Winkler's Fonzie, with his leather jacket, motorcycle, and signature Ayyyy, had stolen the spotlight. He started as a supporting character but quickly became a phenomenon. Kids mimicked his style. Toy stores couldn't keep Fonzie merchandise on the shelves, and ratings showed audiences were glued to his every scene. That's when ABC executives floated an idea: rename the show Fonzie's Happy Days. On paper, it looked like smart branding. In practice, it risked rewriting the DNA of the series. For Ron Howard, it was more than just a title tweak. It was a personal insult. He had built Richie Cunningham into one of television's most recognizable characters, anchoring the show's heart and narrative. Being pushed into second place in the very series he helped launch felt like a professional betrayal. In the mid-1970s, tensions began to simmer behind the scenes of Happy Days. Ron Howard, who had been America's clean-cut Richie Cunningham since the pilot, suddenly found himself facing a challenge that could have rewritten television history. As Henry Winkler's Fonzie exploded in popularity, ABC executives floated the idea of renaming the show Fonzie's Happy Days. On paper, it looked like a marketing win. In reality, it threatened to undermine everything that made the sitcom work. In a tense meeting with creator Gary Marshall and the network brass, Howard didn't hesitate. He told them flatly, if the title changed, he was out. No bargaining, no second thoughts. This was more than pride. It was about protecting the integrity of the show. At just 21 years old, Howard recognized a truth the executives ignored. Happy Days wasn't a one-man act. Fonzie's cool only shone because it was balanced against Richie's everyman charm, Marion's warmth, and the rest of the Cunningham family. Industry insiders were stunned. Young actors didn't defy the network machine, especially not over something as small as a title. Yet Howard's stand forced ABC to back down, preserving Happy Days as the ensemble classic fans still remember today. The twist? Henry Winkler, the man at the center of the debate, sided with Howard. He told executives flat out, "Why fix it if it's not broken? My success depends on the ensemble I'm in." Fonzie might have been the breakout star, but Winkler knew the magic only worked because of the group dynamic. That solidarity killed the title change. Gary Marshall ultimately backed his actors and kept Happy Days as it was. But the confrontation left scars. Howard began thinking seriously about leaving acting to pursue directing, a career move that would eventually make him one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. Looking back, this battle over 2 words foreshadowed deeper issues inside ABC. The same executives who nearly lost their leading man to a branding decision would later mishandle the show's scheduling and finale, turning what could have been a perfect goodbye into one of television's strangest send-offs. This moment wasn't just about egos. It exposed the constant tug-of-war between creativity and corporate profit that shaped television for decades. To the network, Fonzie was a cash cow. To the cast and creators, he was a character who only thrived in the world they had carefully built together. But Howard's ultimatum was only one side of the story. When the spotlight eventually dimmed, it was Henry Winkler, not Ron Howard, who faced the deepest struggle. Away from the cheers, catchphrases, and leather jacket, the man behind television's coolest character was carrying a weight no one in the audience ever imagined. What pain was Winkler hiding beneath Fonzie's perfect smile? Untold pain. Behind the Fonz's cool smile. Henry Winkler was broke when he auditioned for Happy Days.
Starting my career in Happy Days, being a person I thought I should be.
In 1973, the actor who would later become the face of American cool arrived in Hollywood with barely a month's rent saved. He had left New York after years of scraping by in the theater, where steady work was rare and paychecks were small. Winkler admitted later that his finances were dire. He wasn't chasing fame anymore, he was chasing survival. The irony is striking because the man who would soon play Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli, the most confident character on television, was terrified as he walked into that audition room. He read for the role of a leather-jacketed biker, who was originally written as comic relief. Somehow, against the odds, he got the part. That single moment changed not just his life, but also the course of television history. By the third season of Happy Days, television had a new king, and his name was Arthur Fonzarelli. What began as a minor supporting role, written for just a handful of lines each week, exploded into a cultural phenomenon. The Fonz wasn't just a character. He became a national obsession. Kids across America mimicked his Ayyyy catchphrase in school hallways. Barbers saw boys asking for his slicked-back hairstyle, and toy stores couldn't keep Fonzie lunchboxes, T-shirts, and action figures on their shelves. Henry Winkler, who had been a struggling stage actor before landing the part, suddenly found himself one of the most famous faces in America. He graced magazine covers, appeared on talk shows, and received more fan mail than the rest of the cast combined. Audiences didn't just like the Fonz. They tuned in every week specifically to see what he would do next. By 1976, Fonzie was being written into nearly every storyline, and producers even moved his character into the Cunningham household to give him more screen time. Within just 2 years, Henry Winkler had gone from an unknown actor to a pop culture icon, reshaping Happy Days and television itself forever. But fame came with a hidden cost. For more than a decade, Winkler was the Fonz. The leather jacket, the motorcycle, the slicked-back hair, these weren't just character details.
Remember, you were going to put hay on your motorcycle seat?
Yeah.
They became part of his identity. He poured himself so completely into the role that the line between Henry Winkler and Arthur Fonzarelli started to blur. When Happy Days ended in 1984, after 11 seasons, Winkler was unprepared for what came next. He later described the end of the show as a sting, but that word hardly captured the depth of his struggle. It felt like losing a family member. For 10 years, he had lived as the Fonz, and suddenly, the cameras went dark. The confidence disappeared with the role, leaving him face to face with an identity crisis. It wasn't just about finding the next job. It was about answering a scarier question. Who was Henry Winkler without the Fonz? For over a decade, the world had only seen him through that lens. Casting directors, audiences, and even Hollywood itself couldn't separate the actor from the character. Typecasting hit him hard. He was grateful for the role that made him famous, but at the same time, he felt trapped by it. The anxiety was crushing. Winkler admitted that he feared slipping back into the financial struggles that haunted him before Happy Days. He had achieved everything actors dream about: fame, wealth, and cultural immortality. But inside, he felt the same insecurity he carried when he arrived in California with only a few dollars to his name. Hollywood wasn't making it any easier. The Fonz had become more than just a role. It was an American symbol of cool. Audiences didn't want to see Henry Winkler as a lawyer, a doctor, or a teacher. They wanted the Fonz. Breaking free from that image seemed almost impossible. For years, Winkler struggled with rejection and self-doubt. He still loved the character that made him famous, but he feared that his career had ended the moment Happy Days did. It was an emotional weight he carried privately, even as the public still saw him as the man who could make jukeboxes play with a snap of his fingers. But Henry Winkler didn't disappear. Slowly, he reinvented himself. In the 1980s, when acting roles dried up, he turned to directing, working behind the camera on projects like MacGyver and Cop and a Half. Later, he began to rebuild his acting career with fresh roles that proved his range, like his turn as Principal Himbry in Scream and his Emmy-nominated role in Arrested Development. Decades later, his performance in HBO's Barry finally earned him the recognition he had long craved, winning him an Emmy in 2018. Still, Winkler has been open about how painful the post-Happy Days years were. He admitted in interviews that the emotional scars stayed with him long after the show ended. Fame had given him everything he dreamed of, but it also nearly took away his sense of self. While Henry Winkler was battling his own private demons, ABC executives were preparing a move that would spark an even bigger crisis. What rule did they dare to break? The 1984 Olympics ruined Happy Days. February 1984 was supposed to be a proud moment for ABC. The network had secured exclusive coverage of the Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, a global event that promised huge ratings, prestige, and millions in advertising revenue. But behind the excitement, ABC made one of the most damaging scheduling mistakes in television history. A decision so disastrous, it forever changed how networks handled finales, programming conflicts, and even the relationship between viewers and the stories they loved. This is the forgotten disaster that turned Happy Days, one of America's most beloved sitcoms, into the first zombie series on television. At first, it looked like a routine scheduling problem. The Sarajevo Games ran from February 8th to February 19th, 1984. ABC, as the rights holder, cleared its primetime slots for nightly coverage of figure skating, skiing, and ice hockey. This meant that several shows were pushed out of their usual time slots, including Happy Days, which was already in its final season after an 11-year run. The displaced episodes weren't random filler. They were supposed to air in February as part of the show's final stretch leading up to its big goodbye. ABC's executives were faced with a choice: delay the finale until summer to make sure every episode aired in order, or stick to their May finale schedule and figure out what to do with the leftover episodes later. They chose the second option, and that choice broke television's most sacred rule. On May 8, 1984, Happy Days aired its series finale, Passages. It was an emotional farewell. Joni and Chachi got engaged. Fonzie, the show's cultural icon, finally adopted a son. And Tom Bosley, as Mr. Cunningham, gave a heartfelt toast to family and friendship. For millions of viewers, this was closure. After more than a decade of watching, they said goodbye to the characters who had defined 1970s American television. But ABC wasn't done. Once the Olympics were over, they still had those unaired February episodes. Instead of shelving them, the network brought Happy Days back in June and July, months after the finale. To audiences, it felt like the dead had risen. Fans were confused, critics were baffled, and the legacy of one of America's most iconic sitcoms was tarnished. To understand how big a blunder this was, you need to understand what a series finale represents. It isn't just another episode. A finale is a contract between a show and its audience. It gives closure. It allows viewers to emotionally move on. Once that curtain drops, the story is complete. ABC's executives treated episodes like interchangeable blocks of content. To them, it was just business. Air the finale as planned, then throw in some bonus episodes for fans. But television writers, directors, and actors knew better. Storytelling follows emotional logic. You can't reopen a finished story without breaking the bond with your audience. Veteran producers in Hollywood watched in horror. They compared it to a film adding random scenes after the credits, or a novel publishing extra chapters after the last page. The damage wasn't just to Happy Days, it was a lesson to the entire industry. The fallout was immediate. Other networks quietly took notes, determined never to repeat ABC's mistake. By the mid-1980s, contracts began including clauses that guaranteed finale protection, meaning a series ending couldn't be undermined by scheduling changes or bonus episodes. In the end, one misguided scheduling decision gave birth to a rule that still stands today. When a show ends, let it end. No resurrections, no bonus episodes, no second curtain calls. The Olympic scheduling disaster had already shaken Happy Days' final season, but what came next nearly erased television's most perfect farewell. Network executives tried to block a scene destined to make TV history. But what moment were they so desperate to stop, and why were they so afraid of it? Happy Days' finale scene. ABC tried to kill. By 1984, Happy Days had already become more than just a television sitcom. It was one of the longest-running shows in American history, a cultural anchor that gave audiences 11 years of comfort, nostalgia, and laughter. But when it came time to say goodbye, the man behind the series, Gary Marshall, wanted to do something bold, something that television executives at ABC almost shut down completely. Marshall's idea was simple but radical. Have Howard Cunningham, the steady father figure of the show, look directly at the audience and acknowledge them. This is known as breaking the fourth wall, and in the 1980s, it was almost unthinkable. Television shows lived and died by the illusion that viewers were simply peering into another world. Characters weren't supposed to admit cameras existed, let alone speak to the people watching from their couches. ABC executives were horrified. In meeting after meeting, they told Marshall that the idea was dangerous. If Tom Bosley, the actor who played Howard, spoke to the audience, it could destroy everything Happy Days had built. For 11 seasons, the Cunningham family had been presented as real people in 1950s Milwaukee. Executives feared that pulling down the invisible wall would rip viewers out of that world and cheapen the goodbye. But Gary Marshall saw things differently. He knew that Happy Days wasn't just another sitcom. It had become part of the American household. Richie Cunningham's awkward teenage years, Fonzie's leather jacket cool, Joni's growing pains, and Howard and Marion's parenting lessons had all been woven into the daily lives of millions. Families across the country had grown up with the Cunninghams as if they were their own neighbors. Marshall believed the audience deserved recognition. His vision was to have Howard Cunningham speak directly to viewers, not as a character pretending the cameras didn't exist, but as a father figure thanking America for sharing 11 years. It was unconventional, but it was also honest. After a tense back and forth, ABC reluctantly gave in. They were still uneasy, but Marshall held firm, convinced that television history would be made. And on May 8, 1984, when the finale passages aired, the moment arrived. In a quiet living room scene, Tom Bosley looked into the camera and spoke from the heart. Both of our children are married now, and they're starting out to build lives of their own. Marion and I haven't climbed Mount Everest or written a great American novel, but we've had the joy of raising two wonderful kids and watching them and their friends grow up into loving adults. And now, we're going to have the pleasure of watching them pass that love on to their children. And I guess no man or woman could ask for anything more. So thank you all for being part of our family. To Happy Days. Millions of viewers were stunned. Instead of confusion, there were tears. Audiences felt that Howard Cunningham was truly speaking to them, acknowledging not just their time as watchers, but their place as members of the extended Happy Days family. The forbidden scene worked exactly as Marshall envisioned. It didn't shatter the illusion. It completed it. Critics at first dismissed it as a sentimental gimmick, but the response told another story. Fans wrote letters praising the ending. Television historians later highlighted the moment as one of the rare times a sitcom managed to honor the relationship between show and audience in a deeply personal way. What executives had feared would weaken the finale ended up making it unforgettable. Marshall's choice also had a lasting influence. As proof that audiences could handle more experimental storytelling when done with sincerity. It showed that finales weren't just episodes, they were cultural events that demanded care, risk, and honesty. But the perfection of that moment wouldn't last. Just weeks after giving viewers one of the most touching farewells in television history, ABC made another decision that nearly ruined everything. By airing unaired episodes after the finale, they broke the single most sacred rule in television. When a story ends, you don't bring it back to life. And so, the finale scene that rarely made it to air, Howard Cunningham's Thank You to America, was almost buried under a programming blunder so big it still haunts network executives to this day. But even the most heartfelt farewell couldn't survive what came next. Just weeks after Bosley's emotional goodbye, 5 stray episodes stumbled out of ABC's vault like zombies from television's graveyard, undoing the perfect ending that viewers had already accepted. Which forgotten episodes dragged Happy Days back from the dead? 5 forgotten episodes destroyed. Happy Days, perfect ending. Between June and September 1984, ABC made one of the worst mistakes in television history. What should have been a perfect farewell to Happy Days, sealed by one of the most moving finales ever aired, was dragged back to life by the network in a way that felt like cultural vandalism. 5 forgotten episodes, never meant to see daylight after the finale, were released with no explanation, confusing millions of loyal viewers and permanently staining the show's legacy. These weren't bonus episodes designed to tie up loose ends. They weren't epilogues offering fans one last emotional moment with the Cunningham family. They were leftover scripts, casualties of the Olympic scheduling disaster earlier that year, pulled from the vault and dumped onto audiences without context. The damage began on June 4th, 1984, when ABC aired So How Was Your Weekend? On its own, the story was unremarkable, a light-hearted half-hour of sitcom fluff. But coming just weeks after Tom Bosley's emotional farewell speech in the finale passages, it felt jarring. Viewers had already mourned the show's ending. They had said their goodbyes. Suddenly, without warning, the Cunningham family was back on their screens as if nothing had happened. Then came Low Notes, followed by School Dazed. Each episode aired like a ghost from a show that had already been laid to rest. Fans who had processed the finale were forced to relive a version of Happy Days that no longer made sense. It was like attending a funeral, only for the deceased to show up a few weeks later, cracking jokes and pretending the burial never happened. This clumsy resurrection stood in stark contrast to what Gary Marshall had carefully built in Passages. That finale gave viewers true closure. Joni and Chachi's wedding, Fonzie adopting Danny, and Howard Cunningham breaking the fourth wall to thank America for being part of the family. It was one of the rare moments in TV where fiction and reality met in perfect harmony. But these post-finale leftovers undermined everything. By the time Good News, Bad News aired in August 1984, fans hoped ABC had finally reached the bottom of the barrel. The episode showed Chachi getting a chance to tour with the Beach Boys, only to face medical setbacks. While not designed as an ending, it at least carried some emotional weight, enough that some viewers thought maybe this would be the show's unplanned swan song. But ABC had one more card to play, and it was the cruelest of all. On September 24, 1984, the final Happy Days episode ever broadcast was Fonzie's Spots. Instead of dignity, it delivered humiliation. In this storyline, Fonzie tried to join Howard's Leopard Lodge and was subjected to mean-spirited hazing by Potsy. No heartfelt goodbye, no family closure, just television's coolest character being mocked by his friends. That became the final image of Happy Days in syndication history. Not Howard Cunningham's grateful farewell, but the Fonz reduced to a punchline. For a show that had once defined American nostalgia, this ending was nothing short of tragic. Television historians still shake their heads at how ABC could mishandle the conclusion of one of its biggest cultural landmarks. They had everything: 11 seasons of history, a finale that critics and fans praised for its warmth and closure, and a moment that made audiences cry across the country. Yet they sabotaged it with 5 random leftovers that erased all of that goodwill. The so-called 5 episodes of death showed that even a show as beloved as Happy Days could be undone not by bad writing, not by fading stars, but by careless network decisions. After surviving cast departures, shifting audience tastes, and more than a decade on the air, Happy Days didn't fall apart from within. It was killed by its own network. Fans deserve to remember the Cunningham family the way Gary Marshall intended: united, grateful, and at peace. Instead, they were left with a legacy fractured by 5 episodes that should have stayed buried. And that's how Happy Days went from a perfect ending to a cautionary tale, one that still reminds Hollywood of television's most sacred rule: when you say goodbye, mean it. There was no recovering from this blunder. Or was there? How the cast moved on after TV's most infamous finale. When the cameras stopped rolling in 1984, Happy Days had already etched itself into television history. But the botched farewell left the cast carrying a strange legacy. For some, it opened new doors. For others, it became a shadow they could never escape. Ron Howard, who had already begun moving from acting to directing, left Richie Cunningham behind and never looked back. Within a decade, he was winning Oscars for A Beautiful Mind and shaping blockbusters like Apollo 13. The finale disaster barely touched his reputation. If anything, it reminded him why he wanted full creative control behind the camera. Henry Winkler's story was different. The Fonz made him a global icon, but also trapped him. Casting directors struggled to see past the leather jacket, and his career stalled through much of the late 80s. Only in the 1990s, with roles in Scream, The Waterboy, and eventually his Emmy-winning turn in Barry, did Winkler finally rewrite his career narrative. Looking back, he admitted that the odd, anticlimactic ending of Happy Days felt like a personal unfinished chapter. Marion Ross, the beloved TV mom, became a regular face on stage and screen after the show. From Gilmore Girls to voice roles in SpongeBob SquarePants, she reinvented herself as a dependable character actress. But fans never forgot her closing words in the Happy Days finale, her direct acknowledgement of viewers as part of the Cunningham family. That speech remained her most quoted moment. Tom Bosley, who played Howard Cunningham, transitioned smoothly into a second career phase. Yet for millions, he would always be the father who thanked America for joining his family each week. His real life, passing in 2010, was widely mourned as if the Cunningham patriarch himself had died, proof of how deeply his finale speech resonated despite ABC's later missteps. Erin Moran, forever remembered as Joni Cunningham, faced a far more tragic post-Happy Days journey. Typecasting and financial struggles haunted her, and her spin-off, Joni Loves Chachi, collapsed under network pressure. She died in 2017, a reminder of how child stars from TV's golden age often carried burdens that the public never saw. Scott Baio, her on-screen partner Chachi, found modest success in later sitcoms, but became more known for his polarizing political stances than his acting. For him, the Happy Days finale remained both a career high point and a cultural cage he could never fully escape. Anson Williams, who played Potsy, left Hollywood's spotlight and built a surprising career as an entrepreneur. His pivot into business and even politics showed how actors from the series had to reinvent themselves. After the sitcom world they dominated abruptly ended. And then there was Don Most, the class clown Ralph Malph, who leaned into a career in music and occasional guest roles, never chasing fame as aggressively as others, but remaining a beloved convention guest for die-hard fans. For the cast, the mishandled finale didn't erase the magic of their years together, but it did complicate their goodbyes. Fans weren't sure whether to remember the tearful wedding and Bosley's heartfelt speech, or the forgotten episodes that aired afterwards. For decades, that confusion hung over reunions and interviews. Then came 2024. At the Emmy Awards, on the 50th anniversary of Happy Days, Ron Howard and Henry Winkler walked out together, stood before a jukebox, and recreated the legendary Fonz moment. When Winkler struck the jukebox and the theme song played, the audience erupted. Critics called it the real finale the show should have had. For the surviving cast, it felt like closure that ABC had denied them back in 1984. The then and now of the Happy Days cast isn't just about careers. It's about how they each carried the weight of television's most infamous ending. Some thrived, some struggled, but together they proved that even a flawed farewell couldn't erase their place in television history. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check out another interesting video by clicking on the link shown on your screen. See you on the other side.